morning. Please feel free to shift your seating if it makes it easier to, sometimes turning a little this way is easier. You like my new stick? So a good friend who I hadn't seen in many, many years. Many of you know Tegra Fisk. I don't think she's here today. She stopped by on Friday, and it was really lovely to see her. And she brought me this stick, which is a Devil's Club, which is a kind of a herb that I think is used. I don't know. She didn't know how to, and I don't either. So I thought maybe I will use it as a kotsu. But if you've been paying attention, I'm sure that's a heck of a thing to say. If you've been paying attention, I'm sure that you will have noticed that this kind of little February spring that we get many years, and maybe problematically often these days, but so wonderful. It warms our souls and in many ways. And if you pay attention, these little buds that are appearing on so many things, and this early flowers pushing up from the ground. You know, really, this is kind of the darkest time of the year. Well, not quite. You know, we're a month and a half or so past the solstice, but this is the cold time. But there's something moving and emerging. So I hope you can feel that in your own body and mind and spirit as well. It's important turning. Usually, what will happen is it will get cold again. Which is supposed to happen this week. So what I'd like to talk about this morning is fire. And hopefully you're catching a little bit of this feeling of the fire, and it can help keep you warm this week, which is good. You kind of have the balance of these things. So I titled this talk Centering Fire. And first I want to say a few things about fire. Fire is a core spiritual element. And there's a kind of a pull to try to explain what that is, to be able to reduce it into something else, to say it's a symbol, or it's an image, or it is a metaphor. All of those things are true. Okay, it can be a symbol, it can be a metaphor, it can be an image, and I encourage you to encounter fire that way. But don't reduce it to one of those things. That's what I mean here by the word element, that fire simply is. And the material fire that we encounter in the kind of conventional world is an instance of fire. It is a moment of fire. And what I'm talking about here when I talk about fire is not other than that, but is not limited to the way that we think we know what that fire is, right? You light a match and you if you have a wood stove, you light the fire, or starting the grill, or lighting a candle. We have a kind of deep arrogance about that. Like we know what this is. Oh, it's fire. But what's fire, right? It's something that is much richer, deeper, more compelling than a story of fuel that's burning in a kind of chemical way that we can explain. So fire. Abbot Ejo, who was the successor of Dogen Zenji, the founder of this school in Japan, the Soto school in Japan, said the great earth is a single mass of fire. The great earth, a single mass of fire. A single ball of fire sometimes would be one way that you could translate it. Seppo Gison, who was the teacher of Umon, Umon was a famous Zen teacher that was in China in the 700s, contemporary with Tozan and Sozan, who were two of the important figures in the founding of the Soto lineage. Umon was instrumental in the founding of the Umon lineage, which is no longer extant. There's no one in that lineage in our time right now today. But very important teacher that affected all of the different houses of Zen. He said it like this. Zen Master Gison, instructing a group, said, "The Buddha of all times turns the great wheel of the Dharma in flames of fire." Umon said, The flames of fire expound the dharma of the Buddhas of all times. The Buddhas of all times stand there and listen. I read that again. Gison, instructing a group, says, the Buddha of all times turn the great wheel of the Dharma in flames of fire. Umon said, the flames of fire expound the Dharma of the Buddhas of all times. The Buddhas of all times stand there and listen. Abbot Ejo, who quoted this in Komyozo Zammai, a writing by Abbot Ejo, he says, so the light of the flames of fire is the sight of the enlightenment of the Buddhas of all times. It is the teacher of all the Buddhas. For this reason, all of the enlightened ones are always expounding the Dharma in the midst of myriad forms, even as they remain at their own site of enlightenment, which is the light of complete perfect tranquility. It is a matter of valuing the ears without devaluing the eyes. This mass of flames of fire is not in front, not behind. It is just total manifestation. So these are Zen words, and they can be difficult to understand, and they're supposed to be difficult to understand because fire isn't about understanding. It's not about how do I have a map in my mind to be able to explain something. It is about an immediate aliveness that is the world and is us. The fire of the world is impermanence. Everything's changing all the time. Like, really everything. Myriad forms tumbling. It's like a fractal. You look at it on any level. It's not just that things on one level are changing through time, but as your consciousness shifts to look at the thing, the way that our awareness shifts, that also changes. And the things become deep and they become shallow, and everything's moving at once. It's transparent, ungraspable. This is fire. And sometimes we talk about the world being on fire, and when we say that, we mean like we're in trouble. Well, we kind of are. We have been for a long time. It didn't start with the past administration. It didn't start with even industrialization. It didn't start with the agricultural revolution. It just is the nature of the human world, to be on fire, to be fire, really to be alive. And there's the fire of our heart. The world appears through our heart. We could say awareness, we could say consciousness. Oftentimes we translate this word heart as mind. You hear that a lot. But all of their experiences are happening within the theater of your own consciousness. That bears reflecting on. They're not just happening out there, right? For you to experience them in any way, they're happening in the theater of your consciousness. And that's what you call experience. Now, I'm not saying they're in here and they're not out there. I'm saying the out there and the in here are inseparable. They are like a mirror of each other. So the fire of the world and the fire of our heart are not a separate thing. The capacity for life to jump through right here is the capacity of heart, capacity of mind, and it's the capacity of the world that are undivided. We could call that fire. The spark of life. You can feel it in yourself. Even if it's just frustration. Frustration is fire. Now, to be human is to harness fire. You know, there's all kinds of theories about how we became to be what we are. And I think they all have a part to, they'll have their part to play. Some of them are, that once we had fire, we could cook food. Once we had learned to harness fire, we could cook food. And when you can cook food, that means you don't have to eat all the time. You can eat sometimes. And then you can do other things, other times. And when you can do that, then there's this possibility for other things to start emerging. Some people who study this think that are entering deep into the earth, into caves, with fire. There's an image. Carrying a torch down into the depths of the earth. What's that? Maybe that's Zazen. And there on the walls, in the shimmering light, the imagination of humans was ignited. And our capacity to be able to travel in various realms was born because the imagination could be enlivened and trusted. And a whole world appeared through that. That's fire. And then we learn to do very practical things. Kind of worldly harnessing of fire. In the modern human world, what we call energy is fire. Much of it is stuff that we figured out how to make it explode really easily. Right? I don't know if any of you were firebugs as children. Hopefully you've grown out of it. I was like super firebug. And that's like so intoxicating, right? Something that can ignite quickly, like tennis balls soaked in kerosene. So as an example, whatever it is. Huh?
Did you do that?
Oh, yeah. I can tell you about the technique later if you're interested. Fire sucker is what we called it, yeah. It wasn't only kerosene, but a few different things. You think about we've condensed into these things, which really are the blood of our modern world. This ignition. Even electricity. The electricity is made like through water moving something. That's water, that's not fire. But so much of it is through fire. A coal-burning plant that heats up water. This is the thing that always blows me away. Making electricity basically is heating up water to turn turn something, which is how you produce electricity, is the magnets over copper wire, basically. Right? So we have these nuclear power plants. When we talk about fire, right? That they heat up water and they turn these big wheels, basically, turning the wheels of a harnessed fire to produce some fire which we can just place exactly where we want it. We can place it in a little chip, right? And we can tell the chip what to do with it. Our cars, unless you have a Prius. Prius has this in it too, which is the internal combustion engine. Isn't that a fancy word? Internal combustion engine. There's combustion internally, which is harnessed. Fire, basically just pushing and pounding and pounding and pounding and pounding in a rhythm that produces motion. So it's kind of fun to think about, for me anyway, all of the ways in which energy, fire, is harnessed in a worldly sense. And there is such an effect from that. Okay? It's effective in producing certain kinds of results. And I don't mean to say that it's all bad, but it is based in power. The harnessing is the creation of power, another word that we use for energy. But it has a big cost. And the cost tends to get hidden in the brilliance of whatever it is that you're capable to do with the fire when you've harnessed it. Like, how long before we noticed what was coming out of our tailpipes? And we put the catalytic converters on and we cleaned that up a little bit and got to the point where, I remember a friend of mine in Japan when I was complaining about cars, he's like, you could just like suck on my tailpipe and it wouldn't hurt you. And I don't know, I totally believed him. But there was a big cleanup between, like in the 70s, I remember driving around my parents' car, and just getting really sick because of the fumes from all the cars. So there was a change there. But we didn't really think about carbon dioxide. How could that be a problem? Cows farting? Who cares? Well, turns out it's a big problem, right? So So there are these big costs which we don't see in our worldly harnessing of fire. Very difficult to balance. And I suppose this has always been the case. I'm using modern examples, but I suppose this has always been the case back to the time that humans learned to harness fire. There's always a leveraging that happens in that harnessing. And our capacity to center is lost. Because we need a fulcrum to leverage, we've got to set the fulcrum away from ourselves. We've got to set the center of the movement away from ourselves so that we can pull on it in some way and get things moved where we want to. And in that inability to center, fire only grows. That's all it knows how to do, is to grow until all the fuel is burnt up. Because it's not centered. And we are getting a taste of that here in the Willamette Valley. After many decades of fire suppression and monocrop forest planting and earth compaction and all the various things that have brought us to a place now where fire in the mountains is a real different, a very dangerous issue. And this kind of growth of the fire is all we know because we didn't know how to center, and we didn't understand, or we didn't care about the trade-off. Now I'm using the we very broadly. Who made those decisions? It's not all of us, but we all also participate. Without that kind of centering, then we can't do the most important thing, which is a total harmonizing, which is really our requirement as beings of this planet, of this world. Now that kind of worldly harnessing and the effects that I'm talking about there, and that dynamic, is exactly mirrored in our spiritual life, in our spiritual harnessing, in our psychological, emotional, spiritual life. It's completely mirrored. There are great advantages that we can claim through harnessing this fire, through becoming successful, getting yourself pulled together, knowing what the discipline is to focus your mind on caring for things. I'm not saying that's bad, again. This is really important. But as you're doing it, as it becomes an act of power, a kind of domination, your mind wanting to dominate the world, and, this is a really important part, your heart wanting to dominate itself. In that self-domination, something very important is lost. It costs something. And there are real impossibilities in that approach when we harness the spiritual fire. Now, if I gave a concrete example, one would be, like, if you practice meditation, oftentimes we would talk about breath counting, for example, which I oftentimes recommend to people, actually. But in what way do we do that? So if you sit down and you say, like, it's on fire, I'm going to stop the fire. 1, 2, 3. It actually works. I mean, the thing about it is it works. You can do that, and you can find a certain kind of centering in that, right? Which allows you to let go of some of just this craziness, right? That's going on, all this intensity, and to get some room. And in getting some room and a little distance, the reactivity can settle. And in the settling of that reactivity, you can say, okay, now there's a way for me to face this. That's very good. Right? The problem is, what kind of containment has taken place there? What kind of disrespect has been engendered in your heart or mind towards the pain of your life? Now, I'm not saying it necessarily has engendered that, but we have to become sensitive to it, or else we get caught in this other dynamic, which is just like, okay, give me the yoga, and let me just do it, right? Let me just do the form of the yoga that you told me to do, and then the things will be better. And we cause a lot of problems. We cause a lot of problems with that. It's the same. I mean, we can see this like with exercise too. What's that thing people like to do? Go to that gym and throw the tires around? CrossFit? Yeah, CrossFit. So that's cool. And I mean, a lot of people, that's really helpful to them. And but a lot of people get injured. My soon-to-be second son-in-law is a physical therapist. And he said, yeah, I think physical therapists should just like invest in those gyms because they really keep us in business. Right? Because people don't, it's like do the thing, throw yourself in harder. Now there's all kinds of things. Like it's easy to pick on CrossFit because it seems kind of funny in some ways, But that's probably just because I wasn't a jock in high school, so I have some residual karma there. But that kind of mindset can be real, can be really elusively damaging to our own being. Now, I'm not saying that stuff isn't fun and good to do. I mean, I love good wrestle, like with other person or with like something heavy or stick fighting. That's what I liked when I was a kid. Other than burning things, was stick fighting. That was the other thing I liked. Climbing trees. So I'm not saying that stuff is bad, but I'm just saying look at what's happening there. What attitude are you going in with? Is it a reflective attitude, where the fire of this being and the fire of the world are mirroring, or are you just trying to use one against the other, or to leverage one for your purpose, for some purpose, and not paying attention to the emerging costs and the power dynamic? Now, if we look at that kind of harnessing, very natural, very helpful, but limited, we can also talk about something else that is possible with this fire. And that is what I'm talking about in terms of centering. Centering with fire rather than reacting to fire. You see, when we experience a fire in the world or within ourselves, it is intimidating, it's challenging. And so we react to it. And in the reaction, the reflection can't happen. You pull back, you solidify. The containing, the harnessing, the avoiding, those are all ways that we react to. Remember, the Buddhas of all times stand there and listen. This is what Umon says. Rifting off of his teacher's comment about turning the Dharma in the flames of fire, that the Buddhas of all times turn the Dharma wheel. The Dharma wheel is a really fundamental symbol in Buddhism. It is the awakening wheel, the wheel of the medicine of the Dharma, of the Buddha's awakening, which started turning when he stood up from beneath the Bodhi tree and went to teach. We say that was the turning of the wheel. Right? And so here, Gison's saying that all of the Buddhas, all the Buddhas of this world and all possible worlds, they all turn the wheel in flames of fire. That's a radical thing to say, because I think most of us, we think like, I was kind of hoping for the wheel that was not in the fire, right? Because that's, we have the pain of the fire. That's part of what fire is. And that kind of challenge of what the fire is, we were sort of thinking that would be gone. Now, furthermore, something that's happening in this exchange is nirvana, which is the classical way to talk about awakening, right? Means the extinction of fire. So this idea, this longing that we have for the fire to be extinguished, here Gison is saying, no, the Buddhas turn the Dharma wheel in the flames of fire. It's not just about getting away from the fire, because then you're reacting to the fire and it all becomes fragmented. There has to be a centering of the fire for that wheel to turn. And Umon comes forward and says, the Buddhas of all time stand there and listen, that the fire itself is the wheel of the Dharma, and the Buddhas are simply listening. They're simply receptive That is their awakening. So I want to put that forward for you. The fire itself, it's luminous and wild. What is it to stand and listen? What is the awakening of presence to that fire? To clear the space to listen for the resonant, reflective center of where our heart and the world are not two. I think it's a kind of a surprise that working with fire is about deep receptivity. It's not about management, right? That harnessing is about management. How do I create the right structures to make the fire do what I need it to do? Again, not unimportant. But what I'm talking about here is something different. And that centering is foundational. If you don't center and you only create the structures for the fire to go where you want, the limitation will challenge you at some point. The deep receptivity. Think about how black the fuel of fire is. About dark. Completely. Like there's nothing blacker than a burnt wood or coal, right? It's not even, sometimes it'll be a little, like coal be a little shiny or something, a little throw off a little bit, but mostly it's just totally absorptive. Your briquette. That's a good example. Unless it's one of those ones with the wood chips in it, then you have all those, but it's just black. It's like totally absorptive. So that centering is the cultivation of deep receptivity. It's not turning away from the fire, but it's receiving the fire of the world and the fire of our own heart and mind. And when we talk about Buddhist practice, this is all the way through. We can talk about meditation. That would be one way to talk about this receptivity, but also to make an offering, to light a stick of incense and to place it in the brazier and put your hands together and to admit that the containment that I call myself is not the boundaries of what's moving in the world. Right? It's not all about my doing, but it's also about my receiving. So in veneration, or, I'm saying just very simply, like turning towards something that we trust, an image that we trust, an icon, if you're very explicitly have that kind of trust in the Buddha. Some people, they put a rock on the altar or a stick, whatever it is that calls your heart to say, okay, I can tell there's something that is not limited to the containment that I really feel like I want to do because I'm afraid. Like all animals of the forest. Chanting sutras. This is like the real alchemist work. Getting the but that's like very, but that's not the point, right? It's the feeling, the resonance in the belly, the pot of your being, right? And the words of the Buddhas and ancestors are moving through your being like fire. The wheel of dharma is being turned in the flames of fire, which is your being. that that is a way that we burn together rather than reacting, sitting in meditation, caring for others, caring for ourselves. The brilliance of the world, in all its beauty and all its pain, is turning this great wheel. And it's reminding us to stay alive. So much when we come to Buddhist practice of meditation, what we're kind of sold, or what maybe is the bait and switch, which I think is a good bait and switch, by the way, is like, oh, come, cultivate awareness, be mindful, and then it's like, here's your life. You're like, oh, I'm not sure if I want to be mindful of that. But actually, that's the bait and switch, or we could say invitation. To staying alive. Because what do we want to be mindful for? Just the dishes? I mean, I'm into the mindfulness of washing dishes and everything, but that's not the only thing we want to be mindful for, right? We want to be mindful for the horrible tragedy of a human life, and we want to be mindful for the joys that it comes in sharing this world together with each other, other humans, and other beings. That fire is turning all the time. And that mindfulness of our whole life is really what we're after in a spiritual practice. And so, the stay alive is maybe what this wheel is compelling us to. So after I wrote the outline of this talk, this happens to me often, and I apologize to you because what I've just said, I probably have said a million times before. After I finished outlining the talk, I was like, I remember I wrote this, not quite a poem, but not quite poetry, like some 10 or 12 years ago. It was kind of urging of Sogaku, I think. You were like, write something for something we were doing. I can't remember what it was. And I just went to my office and I kind of went, and then I wrote this thing. And then after I wrote the outline, I thought, I think that's what I said in this thing that I wrote many years ago. So I'll read it to you. And it's on the website. And I think we put it underneath the why Zen part, which I'm not sure if this is helpful. Maybe some of you came across it when you first came to our website or not. But I'll just read it to you. Zen. Zen is not useful. It won't make you smart. It won't make you beautiful. It won't entertain you. Zen is alive. The great ancestor Abbot Ejo wrote, "The great earth, a single mass of fire." These words remind how foolish it is to try and keep from getting burned. Body burns brightly, mind burns brightly. Internal combustion engines harness the explosion, push the rider to a destination. Timing is crucial. Tick, tick, tick. One thing precisely after the other. It keeps the wheels in motion, the subject alert to its object. No rest is possible, or BAM! The backfire calls attention to failure. Wow, what amazing power. 8-cylinder determination. But it has a cost of thick steel containment, a massive hole in the mountain, grinding and smelting and casting. What shape does the prison take? A thought of liberation burns. Saving the world, pouring flames upon flames, is a sure way to feel the heat. No excuse to turn away or back off. What is it like when you can't help someone in desperate need? Now I can't help myself. Insatiable appetites for flame, we rip them off in chunks with our teeth, pretending they are good plans or a reasonable approach. Old Firemouth speaks the truth. Now we fall with the venerable Ananda into the realm of the hungry ghosts. Where else could bodhisattvas stand? The eyes of dancing flame are deeply clear and inviting. The green shoots are the brilliant spring. Any questions or comments or rebuttals? Yeah.
So all through this, or a lot of this, I had images of the monks burning themselves in the streets of Saigon. And it will always be here somewhere, that image. The other thing that this all brings up is cremation. And so my question is, some of the statements you made this morning, which I can't repeat exactly, have to do with that being the tradition, custom in this practice.
It's actually, cremation is one of the ways, but it's really not thought of as superior to others. Cremation is a humongous resource draw. Cremation.
Right.
And so if you think about that in olden times, to cremate a body is massive. I know some of you have been to the banks of the Ganges River. I haven't been there. People I've talked to, they say, that's the traditional way. And the amount of wood it takes to burn all of those bodies is massive. And in different places and different times within Buddhism, there's been different approach. In Japan, actually burial was more common for a long time. And then in the modern world, the thing with burial is there's a lot of us and we keep dying. And then where do we go? Like, where do you put them? So there's been a lot of ways of working with that in different, different Buddhist traditions in different times and places. So I've been at the funeral pyre several times, and it's a metal box with a massive burner, and that's the world. It's not just inside that metal box, right? That's like a unit of something that is reflecting that burning of the whole world. They are in the passing of a being, in the dissolution of their materiality. There's some freedom. And it's convenient in that we can, they're easy to manage after that. Get a box. There's several in the altar behind me here. But burial is also how amazing to be absorbed into the earth, to enter into the dark, and to become one with that womb of the darkness. I think for me it has other kind of images that are together with that. But that is fire. That is the great earth that is one massive fire. Maybe the fire of worms and moisture. So don't need to be caught in that kind of literalization of fire. It's not limited to that. In the funerals, you've been to several funerals, and there's one place where the celebrant, or whoever's the main priest for the celebrant, they have a torch, and we use a symbolic torch because we usually aren't literally lighting the funeral pyre. Maybe here in the backyard someday, but we're not usually doing that. So it's symbolic, and so you see there's a stick with like a red ribbon on the end, and the priest is doing this. But there's another way, which is you have a little like toy mattock, which is like a mattock is like it's like a heavy hoe that you use for digging. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that comes from the burial tradition. So you're symbolically burying the person, even though they're already buried, or they're going to be buried after that. So in the ritual that's reflected. And not to go on too long, maybe someone else has something to do, but this is interesting to me, that also in the tradition it was very common, particularly for priests, to be buried in a square box sitting zazen. So, or to be cremated the caskets were square, and you would sit in zazen. It was part of the responsibility of the students of a priest, that if they died not in zazen, that they would get them into zazen before they couldn't. And then so you were to do this. Monks in some of the Vajrayana schools of Japan, they would, approaching their death, they would enter into caves, and their students would wall them in, and they would meditate there and pass away and become part of the mountain. A lot of possibilities. Yeah.
Ejo?
Hey.
I have a question for you about how to recognize when you're working with people who are, when they're doing meditation, they're struggling too much with all of the kind of churning of like negative thoughts and feelings. Because that happens a lot to people that I work with who've been through trauma, and there's neuroscience research about like people have a lot more, like a higher rate of negative thoughts and feelings when they've been through trauma, and they're still. And so, and it was discovered by accident. It's really weird and interesting. But anyway, I'm wondering, like, what is the kind of bodily feeling and like the texture that's going on when somebody really does need like counting, or they should really get up and leave? You know, what's that moment feel like?
So right before I answer that, I want to say that this is an illustration of why it's so important to stay alive to the breadth of our human experience through a meditation practice, because like people discovered that people who had heavy trauma couldn't meditate in the same way. It blows my mind that that's something we discovered. It's like, what kind of wall did we have to build to block off our own heart to then later on realize that deep wounds would show up in meditation? Like, it, to me, that's exact example of how it is that a deeper understanding of meditation is, I think, coming out. There was so much harnessing of the fire and pointing it at an idea of enlightenment, or overcoming difficulty or whatever, that we broke a lot of things. And I'm saying we being just kind of modern meditation people. So now we have developing much more sensitivity to trauma-informed ways of approaching meditation and other things as well. And so your question about what is that place is hard to give like a solid description, because it's different in all different cases. But I could say a couple things. One is that your own capacity to stay reflective to the deep suffering of your own life and the life of the world is where you hone the capacity to be able to suggest something. So like when you're working with patients, your own capacity to face that suffering within yourself and in the world, that gives you develops an intuition about what could be helpful. And so trying to stay present with a person, and to just exactly what you're talking about, all of those deep textures of bodily sensation. Sometimes there's a stiffness. More often there's like a receding. And the receding can be really hard to catch, because a lot of people are very good, if they have that, they're very good at giving you a face while they're running the other direction as fast as they can. But they know how to maintain the face. And so to develop a sensitivity for what is that receding. And then I think the other thing is, if people are being taught ways to do kind of mindfulness or meditation, we should always start with the most flexible, and by flexible I mean that people have choice. They're not just literally they have choice, like no one's probably going to chain you down and say you have to meditate, but if they're given instruction in such a way that says like you cannot move until bum ba bum ba bum ba bum, super not good for somebody who's experiencing that stuff. That you want it to be about agency, not about being like objectified or being put in your place. And that is just whoever is getting, even simple instructions in mindfulness should always emphasize that when you're ready to, or you feel like blah, 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 you gasho and be finished. Or if you're in a meditation session and there's people around and you feel like you just can't be there right then, just gasho and then go. So always making those, referencing it back to a person's agency rather than we're going to hold you in this shape, or I'm going to give you a cognitive structure that's going to hold you in this shape, and then you're going to be okay because the shape is okay. And that's where a lot of the damage, like kind of damaging approaches come. And then if people are really going to work with meditation like on a regular basis, they really should be working with a teacher, whether that's in a religious tradition like this, or is within more of like mindfulness, like secular mindfulness types of meditation. I mean, there's a lot of kinds of teachers that people can work with, but if you're going to take it up regularly, you should have some connection with a way to check in about what you're experiencing.
May I just comment on that? I teach a lot of meditation in the inpatient psych unit at University District, and that's, everything you said is spot on. And then sometimes people have to get up and leave.
Yeah,
They just
yeah.
have to do that, and you let them do it.
Yeah.
You know, but I think choice is super important, and another way people check out is they just fall asleep.
Yeah.
And that's okay too.
Yeah.
If they
I'm-
fall asleep, maybe that's what they needed to do in that moment.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
so I think that's just, thank you for that.
Thank you for adding that, because that, we fight with sleep in meditation,
Yeah.
and that is not there is a time and place to fight with it a little bit.
Yeah.
But I normally what I recommend to people is, what if you just slept?
Yeah,
And then see where that goes. If you have a part of what you're working with that you can't face something or don't want to face something, and sleep is where your consciousness takes you again and again and again and again. If you never allow the sleep to happen, you won't find out about that. You're just only in resistance to it. So there's a way to kind of like go with it, which then allows you to come back up. But there may also be a time where you get to know it well enough that it's like, no. I used to sit with a rock on my head because I was fighting sleepiness so much. And so if you do this, then the rock falls off and it wakes you up, and you had to put it back on. And I felt like that was helpful. It also activates your central core in a certain way, so it kind of brightens up. So I was glad that I did that. But really, to work more deeply with the sleepiness, what I had to do is I had to allow it, and then in allowing it, I could find a kind of emergence through that. So it's not just like a clear, but generally speaking, if you feel a lot of sleepiness, see what it has to teach you. Yeah. Okay.
This and all our teachings are offered free of charge. If you would like to make a donation, please visit our website at buddhaeye.org and click the donate button at the top of the page. Thanks.